Habur Crucible 7. Sevgi. The story told in this chapter is entirely true. Like the previous chapters.
It had been 10 full days since anyone from Crucible village came up to our outpost. The village sat right below our position, practically at our feet. On normal days, the routine never changed. Villagers would walk the path up, bring homemade bread and pickled vegetables to share. We would chat while we caught our breath, check on their families, walk them back to the path when they left. Even the village elder would often invite us down for tea. But those days, nothing was normal. A cold, heavy fear of abduction had settled over every inch of the mountain. No one could go down to the village. No villager could climb up to us easily. Even the elder didn't call anymore. The lines of contact that had held for years had been cut clean through. Every man at the outpost slept with one hand on his rifle. Every conversation was quieter, shorter, always circling back to the latest rumor. You could feel the caution in the air. You could taste it on your tongue. Everyone was on edge. No one let their guard down for a minute. We didn't know when the next strike would come, or who would be taken next. All we knew was that the world we had known just 2 weeks earlier was gone. It was the hottest part of the entire summer. The sun hung over the outpost like a burning plate, turning the rock and dirt into an oven. We stood our posts through the hottest hours of the day, and the heat burned into every inch of exposed skin. The ground split open in wide, deep cracks from the dry heat. You could watch the cracks spread, slow and steady, across the hard-packed dirt in front of the command tent. The air was so thick with heat it felt like pushing through water when you walked. Drawing a full breath felt impossible. Sunburns pulled tight across our faces and arms. Dust mixed with constant sweat, leaving dark streaks crusted into our skin. No amount of washing could get it out. Exhaustion seeped into our bones the moment we woke up, and stayed there until we fell asleep. There was no shade anywhere across the outpost perimeter. Not a single tree big enough to hide under. Not a single rock outcrop that cast more than a hand-sized shadow. All we had were 3 canvas structures. A mess tent, a small kitchen tent, and my command tent. These weren't built for comfort. They weren't built for resting. They only existed to cover the absolute necessities of daily work. The rules for our rotation were strict, designed to keep every post covered at all times. But the heat wore us down faster than any enemy could. We barely got any sleep at all, day or night. The heat was too thick to rest comfortably during the day. The sun beat down on the canvas tents, turning the inside into a furnace the moment you stepped in. No one could drift off when every layer of their clothing was soaked through with sweat. When night finally fell and the temperature dropped, a new enemy came out: the mosquitoes. They swarmed every exposed patch of skin in clouds. Their bites itched so bad you couldn't lie still for more than a minute. You swatted until your arm grew tired, and they just came back. Around midnight, the exhaustion always won. Men fell asleep before they even noticed their own eyes closing. It didn't matter how many times I warned them about staying alert. It didn't matter how strict I was about sentry duty. The pattern repeated itself, night after night. One sentry would lean against his post, just for a second to rest his legs, and the next thing he knew, he was out on the ground. I should have punished the men who fell asleep on duty. The rules said I had to. It was a breach of discipline, a risk to every man on the outpost. But I couldn't bring myself to give the order. I felt the same exhaustion dragging at my own bones. I knew what it was like to fight for every breath during the day, and fight for every minute of sleep at night. I was the commander, but I was also a man under the same sun, the same mosquitoes, the same endless pressure. I couldn't punish them for what I felt myself, so I said nothing. I kept my warnings coming, but I never followed through with the punishment. I was stuck. I knew the danger of what was happening, but I didn't know what else to do. That night, The exhaustion sat so heavy on my chest I couldn't fall asleep. I lay on my cot in the command tent, listening to the mosquitoes buzz against the canvas, listening to the quiet snores of the men in the adjacent tent. The tension in my bones wouldn't loosen. I couldn't stop thinking about the empty posts, the men who couldn't stay awake no matter how hard they tried. I threw off my thin blanket, swung my legs over the edge of the cot, and pulled my boots on. The night air hit my face when I stepped outside, cool after the day's heat. It should have felt good. It didn't. I grabbed my sidearm, clipped it to my belt, and set off. I would check every post, one by one. I started with the northern perimeter, closest to the command tent. The first post was empty. The sentry's rifle was propped against the sandbag barrier. He was curled up in the shadow behind it, fast asleep. I kept walking. Second post, same thing. The sentry was sprawled on the ground, snoring so loud I could hear him 10 steps away. My jaw tightened. I expected this. I knew how bad it was. But part of me still hoped at least a few men would stay awake. I moved west, then south, then east. I checked every single post along the entire outpost perimeter. Not a single man stood at his assigned spot. Every post was empty. Every sentry was curled up somewhere out of sight, unconscious from exhaustion. I stopped at the easternmost post, the one closest to the path down to Crucible village. I leaned against the sandbag barrier and stared out into the dark. A heavy, cold anxiety settled into my chest, thick and heavy. I knew exactly how dangerous this was. Anyone could have walked right through the perimeter. I stood there in the dark, trapped between two impossible choices. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do next. I turned away from the post and started walking back to the command tent. My boots crunched over cracked, sun-baked gravel with every step. The night air had turned sharp, cold enough to make the sunburn on my neck sting. The tension of the inspection had drained the last of my energy. I'd intended to stand guard myself, at least until the first sentry woke at dawn. But by the time I reached the tent flap, my legs were shaking too hard to keep standing. I unclipped my sidearm, set it on the small wooden table next to my cot, and collapsed onto the canvas. I didn't even bother pulling the blanket over me. My eyes closed before the thought of staying alert fully formed in my head. The exhaustion won, even for me. I don't know how long I slept. It couldn't have been more than a few hours. It was still dark when a sharp, muffled sound jolted me straight awake. My heart hammered against my ribs before I even registered what I'd heard. Someone was knocking at the tent door, quiet but urgent. I lay still for a second, listening, to make sure I hadn't dreamed it. The knock came again, a little louder this time. "Commander?" A sentry's voice, low and strained, filtered through the canvas. "Commander? Are you awake?" I pushed myself up on one elbow, my mouth still thick with sleep. "What is it?" I called back. "We have a visitor, sir. She wants to meet with you." The words didn't make sense at first. Visitors didn't come to the outpost before dawn. Not these days. Not when everyone was too afraid of abductions to move after dark. I blinked hard to clear the sleep from my eyes, then reached for my flashlight on the table beside me. The clock next to the flashlight read just past 4. It was still pitch black outside. A visitor? At this hour? I mumbled the question again to myself, then pushed myself off the cot and stood up. I buttoned the top of my shirt, clipped my sidearm back to my belt, and pulled the tent flap open. The dark night air hit me again, and I blinked to adjust my eyes. The sentry stood just a few steps outside, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his face tight with tension. I flicked the switch on my flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, straight into the sentry's face. He squinted and stepped back, out of the light. That's when I saw the second person, hunched low behind his shoulder. I swept the flashlight down, and the light landed on her. She flinched hard, lifting one arm to block the brightness from her eyes. Her chest rose and fell in fast, ragged bursts, like she'd been running for miles without stopping. I could see mud coating her from head to toe, caked into every line of her body. Her breath came in short, rasping gasps that I could hear even from where I stood. I lowered the flashlight a little to keep it out of her eyes and studied her. Her shoulders were shaking, deep, uncontrollable shaking that started in her hands and moved all the way up her arms. She lowered her arms slowly, and her eyes locked onto mine. The moment our eyes met, she pushed past the sentry and stumbled forward a step. Her mouth opened, and the words came out, over and over, raw and broken. "Commander, don't turn me in! Please, don't turn me in!" I stepped forward and caught her elbow before she could collapse to the ground. The mud on her sleeve crumbled against my hand. I guided her back into my command tent, keeping my steps slow so she could keep her balance. I pulled the only wooden chair I had out from behind my table and helped her sit down. She sank into it like her legs couldn't hold her weight another second. The wood creaked under her, soft but sharp in the silent tent. I turned to the sentry, who'd followed us in and stood frozen by the door. His eyes were wide, still processing what he'd found on the mountain path. "Go get 3 glasses of water from the kitchen," I told him, "and not a word of this to anyone. Not to the other sentries, not to the sergeants, not to anyone. Do you understand me?" He nodded once, already turning to leave. His boots scuffed the gravel outside as he hurried toward the kitchen. I stood by the table, watching the woman. She still hadn't said anything else, just kept her eyes fixed on the dirt floor of the tent, her hands clutching the edge of the chair seat. The sentry was back in less than 2 minutes, carrying a dented tin pitcher and 3 chipped glass mugs. He set them down on the table, didn't say a word, and slipped back out, pulling the tent flap closed behind him. I poured the water full to the brim in each mug, then carried all 3 over to her and set them on the small crate beside her chair. She looked up at me, then grabbed the first mug with both hands. Her knuckles turned white as she lifted it to her mouth. She drank it all in 3 long swallows, didn't stop to breathe. After the 3rd mug, the shaking that had racked them from the moment I saw her started to slow. She pressed her palms flat against the legs of the chair and breathed out slow. I leaned back against the edge of my cot, folded my arms across my chest, and waited. "What's your name?" I asked. "Who are you running from?" She paused for a long beat, her fingers picking at a splinter in the chair leg. The silence stretched out, thick enough to cut with a knife. Then she lifted her chin and met my eyes again. "Sevgi," she said. "Who are you running from?" I asked again. She paused once more, licked her dry lips, and spoke the name clear. "From the PKK." I let the words settle, didn't interrupt while she caught her breath. Then I nodded and told her to start from the beginning. She took another slow breath and began. She graduated from Crucible teacher training school. That was where she met Ibrahim. She fell in love. Her family hated the relationship. Her father rejected it outright. "I don't have a daughter to give to a Kurd," he told her. She fought him. She begged him. Nothing worked. He wouldn't change his mind, so they ran. They left the town together, walked east, crossed through Mardin, and ended up in Salopi. They moved in with Ibrahim's family. The house was crowded. It was poor. Sevgi had never seen that level of scarcity before. She told me she'd always thought her own family was poor, but living in that house, sharing 1 plate of bread between 7 people, going to bed hungry most nights, that taught her what poverty really meant. Months passed. Things stayed hard, but they stayed together. Then Ibrahim scraped together a small loan. He rented a tiny 1-room house on the edge of town. They moved in. For the first time since they ran, they had a space that was just theirs. Sevgi started to breathe again. She started to feel hope. They both applied for open teaching positions in the area. They planned their future. They were going to build a new life. A quiet, ordinary life. Just the 2 of them. They waited for the applications to be processed. Every day, Sevgi would walk down to the post office to check for a letter. Every evening, they would sit on the step of their little house and talk about what they would do once the job offers came. She thought the hard part was over. She thought their new life was just about to start. That new life never got to start. One night, 3 armed men pushed open the door of their small house. Sevgi was folding laundry on the cot by the window. She froze mid-fold. Ibrahim said nothing. He just stood by the door, his eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't look at her. The next morning, the men told her to pack what she could carry. They were leaving. They said it was for smuggling. They said she'd get paid well, enough to set them up for life. She looked at Ibrahim. He nodded. She believed him. She trusted him. She'd left everything for him. She'd never questioned a single choice he'd made. Love takes your reason away, she told me. You don't stop to ask what's wrong. When you love someone, you just go. They crossed into Syria, moving through Mardin and Nusaybin. They ended up in the Bekaa Valley. That was when the first pieces of the truth started to click into place. There were guns, training camps, ranks, the organization. She still didn't put it all together until Ibrahim was gone. He disappeared one day, just like that. He didn't leave a note. He didn't say goodbye. She was left alone, surrounded by strangers who didn't trust her, who didn't tell her anything. First, they made her cook, clean the barracks, wash the uniforms of the fighters. Then they marched her to the training range. They handed her a rifle. That was when the truth hit her, full force, like a fist to the chest. They were going to send her back across the border. They were going to have her join a raid on this outpost. They were going to have her kill soldiers. That chance came when her cell crossed back over the border into Turkey. They moved on to Mount City, then started working their way through the local villages, spreading propaganda, recruiting new fighters. When they reached Kapila village, she knew this was her only shot. This was where our outpost sat, just up the hill from the village. She'd heard the fighters talk about us. She knew we were here. That night, after the rest of her group settled into the abandoned farmhouse they were using as a base, she said she needed to go out to use the toilet. No one checked her, no one followed. They were too close to their target, too confident that no one would suspect a thing. She walked away from the house, into the dark, and didn't stop. The creek ran at the edge of the village property, steep banks going down into black water. She didn't hesitate. She jumped. The cold hit her like a shock, stealing her breath for a second. Her feet slipped on the smooth, wet rocks under the surface. She caught herself on a root, almost fell, righted herself, and kept going. Sharp rocks cut her calves. Brambles caught at her sleeves, tore at her skin. She climbed up the other side of the bank, got her feet under her, and started moving up the hill toward the outpost. She hid in the brush every time she heard a voice, every time she saw a flicker of light. She walked for hours. Her legs burned. Her lungs ached. She didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Finally, when the sky started to lighten at the edges, she stumbled into our outer sentry line. She'd made it. She stopped talking when she finished that sentence. Her hands were still resting on the edge of the chair, not moving. She looked at me, waiting. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, turning her story over in my head. I didn't know what to do. The tent was so quiet I could hear the wind brushing the canvas outside. Sevgi didn't break the silence. She just waited, her eyes locked on mine, every muscle in her body still, ready for whatever I would say next. I stared back at her, my mind running through every rule, every order, every possible outcome of hiding her or turning her in. My throat felt tight. My hands rested on the table, fingers pressing into the worn wood. I still didn't know what to do. Then the tent flap pulled open. The canvas rubbed against the dirt floor with a sharp scraping sound that cut through the silence. I looked up. It was the junior messenger from the guard post, his boots still dusty from the walk over. His face was tight, his breathing a little faster than it should have been. He stepped inside, kept his voice low, like he didn't want anyone outside to hear. "Commander," he said, "the village elder is here. He's asking to see you. He says he's looking for a missing girl." My chest went cold. Every piece clicked into place in that single second. The elder had noticed she was gone. He'd tracked her this far. He knew she'd run for the outpost. I sat there for 3 full heartbeats, my mind racing to catch up. I thought of Sevgi, sitting right there in front of me, still shaking from her 10-hour run through the dark. I thought of the rules, written clear in every standing order we'd been given. Any person fleeing the PKK must be turned over immediately to the gendarmerie for processing. No exceptions. I cleared my throat. I kept my voice steady, so Sevgi wouldn't pick up on the panic under my skin. "Tell him I'll be right there," I said. I stood up. I adjusted my belt at my waist. The pre-dawn air was still thick with heat, even this early. It stuck to the back of my neck, heavy, like a hand pressing down. I walked slowly from my command tent to the outer guard post, every boot step crunching into the loose gravel that covered the camp paths. I could see the elder waiting by the sandbag barrier, his shoulders tight, his hands clasped tight in front of him. He didn't smile when he saw me. He didn't make small talk, the way he usually did when he came up to the outpost. He stepped forward immediately, straight to the point. "We've got a foolish girl missing from the village," he said. "We've searched every cottage, every creek bank, every abandoned hut up the hill. No one has seen her. I know she ran this way." He looked straight into my eyes. No wavering, no beating around the bush. "Is she here, Commander?" My tongue felt thick for a second. I almost said yes. I almost opened my mouth and told him the truth, right there, and let the chips fall where they would. But I thought of Sevgi, back in my tent, hands shaking, waiting to hear what I decided. I thought of what would happen to her if I turned her in. I opened my mouth. "She's not with us," I said. The words came out steady, even, no tremor. I even called over the sentry sergeant, who stood a few feet back, and asked him point blank, "Have you seen a stranger woman in the camp this morning?" The sergeant shook his head immediately. He hadn't seen her. He couldn't have seen her. "We haven't seen anyone," the sergeant said. The elder's jaw tightened. He didn't believe us. I could see it in the way his eyes flicked past me, toward the camp, like he was searching for a flicker of movement, a hint of the girl behind any of the tents, but he had no proof. There was no way he could search the camp without my permission. He had no other option. He dipped his head. "All right," he said. "If you say you haven't seen her, I'll take your word for it." He turned to leave. I watched him walk down the hill toward the village, his shoulders still tight, his steps slow. I stood there for a full minute after he was out of sight, just breathing. I'd done it. I'd lied. The lie hung in the air between me and the empty path. I could feel it pressing against my ribs, heavy, hot, like a stone I'd swallowed. I knew what this meant. If anyone found out, I'd lose my commission. I'd face a court-martial. My career would be over before I turned 40. I could still fix it. I could run after the elder, call him back, tell him the truth. The risk would go away. The rules would be satisfied. I turned toward the camp, and my feet didn't move toward the elder. They moved back toward my command tent. I walked slowly, every step feeling heavier than the last. The pre-dawn breeze shifted, and it carried the smell of wood smoke from the kitchen tent, the same smell it carried every morning. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. I reached my tent. I reached out and grabbed the canvas flap. I pulled it open slowly, so the sound wouldn't startle her. The light from the east seeped in around me, cutting through the dark inside. Sevgi was still sitting where I'd left her, on the wooden chair by my table. Her hands were clamped tight around the edge of the seat. Her eyes were wide, locked on the door. She'd been sitting that way the whole time I was gone. Not moving, not breathing easy, just waiting. The second I stepped inside, she leaned forward a little, like she was trying to read the answer on my face before I said a word. I closed the tent flap behind me. I cut off the light from outside, left just the two of us in the dim, quiet space. I called the only two men I trusted completely into the tent. They knew the rules, they knew the risk, but they didn't hesitate when I told them what we needed to do. One of them pulled a straight razor from his kit. He walked over to Sevgi, and she didn't flinch when he tilted her head back. She just closed her eyes and held still. The razor scraped across her scalp, cutting through the messy tangles, pulling loose hair in clumps onto the floor of the tent. In 10 minutes, her head was smooth, clean-shaven, no trace of the long hair she'd walked in with left. We pulled a uniform over her shoulders. It fit loose across her shoulders, but it wasn't loose enough to stand out. Everyone's uniform fit a little wrong in the outpost. Then came the boots. The smallest pair we had still swam on her feet. She lifted one foot, then the other, and thought for a second. She pulled off the issued boots, slipped her own worn leather shoes back on, then pulled the military boots back over the top. They cinched tight at the ankle. She shifted her weight, walked a few steps across the tent, and nodded. "It works," she said. We forged her discharge papers first, then added her name to the roll of an understrength artillery unit posted to the outpost. She became Private Sevgi, numbered and registered, just like every other soldier on the base. She struggled at first, her arms shaking when she held the rifle for long drills, her steps off rhythm when the unit marched, but she caught on fast. By the end of the first week, she moved through the camp like she'd been there her whole enlistment. No one looked twice. 10 days. 10 days of sleeping with one eye open, of answering questions too quickly, of glancing over my shoulder every time a soldier stepped toward my tent at night. Sevgi held it all perfectly. She moved through every routine without a single misstep. No one questioned her, no one suspected a thing. I'd started to think we might actually pull it off. I'd started to breathe easier, just a little. Then the messenger ran up to me, boots kicking up dust from the cracked, dry ground. His face was pale, his chest heaving from running across the camp. "Battalion commander's here," he said. "He's doing an unannounced inspection." The breath caught in my throat. My shirt, already soaked through with sweat, stuck cold to my back. I looked past the messenger, out across the training field. I counted the steps in my head. 100, 50. Right there, 50 meters from where I stood with the messenger, Sevgi was training with the rest of the artillery privates. She was holding her position by the gun barrel, shoulders squared, just like she'd been taught. If he walked that way, if he decided to check the training rotation, everything would fall apart. I stood frozen, my hand resting on the holster at my hip, and watched the commander turn away from the command tent. He started walking toward the training field, straight towards Sevgi. My tongue went dry. I couldn't move. I couldn't think of a single excuse to turn him back that wouldn't sound like a lie. Every second he walked, the distance shrank. 40 meters, 30. Then I saw him. Moomin, the radar operator, was standing by the side of the training line. He'd seen the commander coming. He'd seen where he was going. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look over at me, didn't wait for an order. He stepped forward and yelled something I couldn't make out over the wind. The lead artillery crew reacted instantly. They spun the heavy gun barrel all the way left, then cranked it back right, fast enough to kick up a cloud of dry dust. The entire line followed. Every gun turned. Every crew moved. No one stood still. The whole training field turned into a controlled, chaotic blur of moving metal and shouting men. Moomin walked out in front of the line, hands up, and waved the battalion commander back. "Safety first, sir," he yelled. "We're running live adjustment drills. No one gets within 50 meters of the firing line until we lock the breaches." He talked for 10 more minutes about supply reports and rotation schedules. That 10 minutes felt longer than the entire 10 days we'd hidden Sevgi. When he finally got back in his jeep and drove away, my legs gave out. I leaned against a fence post and breathed. We'd made it. The closest call was over. The dust settled back onto the cracked ground. The camp went back to its usual routine. The gendarmerie never came back. The villagers stopped asking. The 10 days I'd counted down were over. The discharge rosters had been filed and approved. The transport was waiting at the edge of the outpost to carry the rotating soldiers down to the main road. I pulled Sevgi aside after the final roll call that morning. Her shoulders were still squared, her posture still straight, just like she'd been taught. But when I told her it was time to go, I saw the old fear flicker back across her face for half a second. She didn't say anything. She just nodded. I walked her out to the transport myself, keeping to the back paths that no one used this early in the morning. I'd already told the company sergeant major everything. I told him to get her on the first bus for Malatya when they reached the garrison. I told him to make sure no one checked her papers too closely, no one asked too many questions. He didn't ask why. He just nodded. The other soldiers were already climbing onto the back of the truck, laughing and talking, ready to get away from the outpost heat and back to a proper town. Sevgi climbed up with them. She pulled herself up onto the tailgate, then turned. She stood there for a second, looking down at me, the morning sun glinting off the top of her shaved head. She didn't wave. She didn't call out. She just looked. The driver started the engine. The truck rumbled to life. It pulled away, kicking up a long cloud of dust behind it. I stood there and watched it go, until it disappeared around the curve of the mountain road. The dust settled over the mountain road again. The outpost went back to its old rhythm. Cracked ground, burning sun, mosquitoes at night, endless sentry shifts. I never received any report of a missing girl being found. I never heard any rumors of a runaway caught in the mountains. The days turned to weeks, the weeks turned to months, and the months turned into years. I moved from post to post. I got promoted. I left the border outpost behind for staff assignments and bigger bases. Then I got posted to Istanbul, to the Armed Forces Academy, where I taught new officers how to lead men in the field. 14 years passed between that morning and the conference I gave. 14 years of new assignments, new faces, new problems to solve. But I never forgot Sevgi. Not for a single month, not for a single week. Sometimes I'd be grading papers at my desk, and I'd suddenly see her, hands shaking over a glass of water, repeating "Don't turn me in" over and over. Sometimes I'd walk past a classroom full of student teachers, and I'd wonder, did she ever get that job she'd trained for? Did she ever build the quiet, normal life she risked everything to get? Did she ever hate me for sending her out alone, even though it was the only way I could keep her safe? I still don't have a clear answer to the question that has followed me all these years. Military rules said I was wrong. Military discipline said I should have turned her over the second she walked into my tent. I knew that then, and I know that now. But I also knew what I did and why I did it. I didn't make the call that morning as a commander. I made it as a human being, and that choice has never left me. It still sits with me, every single day. The conference ended just after 5 in the afternoon. The room was still warm from the lights and the crowd. I stepped down from the podium, shook a dozen hands, answered a dozen quick questions from the young officers in attendance. One by one, the audience filtered out. The room emptied. I leaned against the edge of the podium, pulled out a handkerchief, and wiped the sweat from my forehead. My feet ached from standing and talking for an hour straight. I was just reaching for my bag to leave when I saw her. She was standing a few feet away, waiting patiently until the last of the other guests had gone. She stepped forward when our eyes met, hand outstretched, a soft smile on her lips. She congratulated me on the conference. She said the speech had stuck with her. I took her hand. I couldn't place the face at first, but something stirred in the back of my memory. I couldn't place the face at first.
Merhaba komutanım, ben Sevgi.
I ask for your support. Together we will succeed. Subscribe now, like and comment. Thank you.